Welcome to our journey of transformation. We have been seeing throughout our journey that loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, the first command, is transforming. It transforms us to love as our Father loves us, loving unconditionally. And so the first command takes us to the second one, loving our neighbors as we love ourselves, to learn to love as God loves. And so we have been studying the teachings of Jesus contained within his parables, his conversations, and his principles that help us understand the practice of loving as our Father loves, loving our neighbors. And in this fifth study, rather the sixth study in the fifth stage, we're going to be thinking about the conversation Jesus had as he ate dinner with Simon the Pharisee. That's recorded for us in Luke chapter 7. So first we're going to be reading from Luke chapter 7, beginning with verse 36. This is where Luke writes, "When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster box of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, 'If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner.' Jesus answered him, 'Simon, I have something to tell you.' 'Tell me, teacher,' he said. 'Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more?' Simon replied, 'I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven.' 'You have judged correctly,' Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, 'Do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not pour oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little.' Then Jesus said to her, 'Your sins are forgiven.' The other guests began to say among themselves, 'Who is this who even forgives sins?' Jesus said to the woman, 'Your faith has saved you. Go in peace.'" In chapter 15 of his gospel about Jesus, Luke records one of the most famous parables of Jesus, the story of the lost son. And throughout our series of studies and our journey of transformation, we have been referring to this parable of the lost son. Jesus described the tragic experience of a son who left his father, taking money from his inheritance to live in a distant country far from the father. After wasting all of his resources pursuing deceptive dreams of pleasure, he fell into the deep despair of having no peace or purpose, feeling completely lost and dead inside. Then he remembered his father's house, and the love and acceptance he had felt in his younger, innocent days. He decided his only hope was to return to the father and ask for forgiveness. When his father saw him coming, the father ran to embrace him and accept him as a son once again. There was celebration in the heart of everyone, except his older brother. His brother was angry with his father, not understanding why his father had so easily forgiven his younger brother. Why were people so quick to celebrate? But the older son's confusion was really due to the fact that although he had always remained at home, he had never discovered the depths of his father's mercy and love. The father explained to his oldest son that his brother had been lost and was now found, and that he had been dead and was alive again. For this reason, they were celebrating with such great rejoicing. In truth, The older son depended on his father's love and grace just as much as his younger brother did. But in his arrogance, he could not recognize this reality. Jesus originally told this parable to illustrate how loving and merciful our Heavenly Father is, and how ready He is to bring us back from the destruction of sin and give us new life in His presence. The story has given relief and hope to countless people who have experienced the same tragedy of living without the Father. In the 7th chapter of his Gospel, Luke describes a real-life example of a woman who shared the same despair of a life separated from the Father and her discovery of new life through His forgiveness and acceptance. It is a story of how Jesus Himself revealed and expressed the Father's love. Simon, a Pharisee, invited Jesus to dinner. The Pharisees were a powerful group of religious leaders among the Jews who believed they could prove their righteousness by closely obeying the law of Moses, in addition to a long list of religious traditions they had invented. Their tendency was to think that they, among all people, were the most righteous because of the rigid way they followed these traditions. But not all the Pharisees were the same. Some were jealous opponents of Jesus because he and his disciples refused to follow these man-made traditions. Others were curious and listened carefully to what he taught. Still others had become secret believers, afraid to admit their faith in him because their group would have expelled them from the community. We will humbly give Simon the benefit of the doubt and believe that he was at least curious and perhaps even a secret believer. During their conversation, he addressed Jesus as teacher. Other Pharisees also attended the dinner. We can imagine that there was an atmosphere of respect for the presence of Jesus and unspoken pride for sharing the table with him. Simon must have made certain everything was perfect for the occasion. Picture the scene similar to the setting in the upper room when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, only that the Pharisees replaced the apostles around the table. They were reclining on pillows at a low table, sitting on their folded legs with their feet behind them. Like the upper room scene, no one had washed the feet of the main guest, Jesus. Then, in the middle of the conversation, while they were sharing the meal, those present were surprised, confused, and even shocked as a woman entered the room unannounced and uninvited. She was quietly crying. Seeing where Jesus was at the table, she slowly walked over and stood behind him. As she continued weeping, her tears fell on his feet, still dusty from the street, moistening them. Astonishing everyone intently watching, she bent to her knees and carefully dried his feet with her long strands of hair. Then she gently kissed them as a sign of humble respect. She even poured some precious perfume on them that she had brought with her. In such moments of surprise, we react impulsively, thinking as we have been trained to think without questioning our assumptions. Simon was a Pharisee. In the culture of the Pharisees, he had been trained to think critically of others, able to only see the negative, assuming the worst, and judging people before knowing them. Even if Simon had invited Jesus to dine because on some level he recognized attitudes and behaviors in his life that needed transformation, in this impulsive moment, his mind automatically went back to what had been normal for him. Our thoughts are difficult to control when we are suddenly taken off guard. Simon, recognizing the woman because of her bad reputation in the community, immediately judged her as a sinner. Since he believed he was living a righteous life, his judgment of her as a sinner created a huge wall between them. He would not be able to understand her heart or even wonder why she was crying. His first concern was that this woman had embarrassingly interrupted the respectful atmosphere of his dinner with Jesus. He looked around the table and saw the disgust of his fellow Pharisees and reflected their displeasure himself. But he was also surprised by Jesus' reaction to the woman. He could not understand why he was allowing her to do this to him. She was a woman, a sinful woman, and she was touching him, touching his feet and wiping them with her hair. He actually began to have some doubts about Jesus. He thought to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus' own disciples would at times fall back into former ways of thinking about people when they did not take the time to carefully consider what Jesus was teaching them about loving their neighbor. Simon had not spent as much time with Jesus as the disciples, and if they still had trouble practicing compassion, then Simon certainly would have problems too. So, without thinking carefully, he made the same judgmental assumptions that his fellow Pharisees commonly made. Jesus knew exactly what was on Simon's mind. His thoughts were probably obvious by the expressions of confusion and distaste on his face. Jesus was not bothered, though, by what Simon thought of him, but he was disturbed by what Simon thought about the woman. Simon's assumptions blinded him from seeing the reason why she had come. No one had asked her why she was crying or why she had come to find Jesus. She was feeling the full tragedy of how far her life had taken her from the Father's presence, feeling what the lost son had felt. Sin had profoundly damaged her spirit, and she felt devastated. Like the lost son, she had been feeling dead inside. Now she needed healing, not more condemnation. For a long time now, she had tried to contain the guilt and sorrow she felt. But when she saw Jesus, all the buried emotions came to the surface that she could not hold back, and she could not hold back any longer the tears that flowed when she entered the room. She had had an idea of the risk she was taking by entering Simon's house and attracting the stares of disapproval by Simon and his friends. Nevertheless, she determined to humble herself, to submit to the humiliation of these people, because she desperately wanted to be healed. She could see in the face of Jesus the acceptance and safety that she needed to allow her emotions to be free. She somehow knew that she would find so much grace from Jesus that it would outweigh the humiliation of the Pharisees. Her need was urgent. She decided that the present was the right moment to stop putting off change and to act on what her heart was saying. It did not matter where she would find Jesus or what he might be doing when she came to him. In advance, she had even prepared the costly alabaster jar of perfume as an expression of gratitude for how she knew she would feel in his presence. Knowing the negativity of Simon's thoughts, Jesus broke the silence of the moment to speak to his host. Simon, I have something to tell you. Simon's thought pattern came to a sudden halt. He became aware again of Jesus' presence and perhaps felt a bit guilty for his judgmental thinking. He quickly responded, Tell me, teacher. So Jesus told him a short parable. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them would love him more? The answer was clear to Simon. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. That was the right answer. We all tend to appreciate the people who do the most for us. We also tend to be more grateful for what we receive if our need is more profound. In case Simon did not make the connection, without looking at him and instead looking at the woman, Jesus contrasted the loving, appreciative actions of the woman to Simon's lack of courtesy. Simon had not given him water to wash his feet, but she had humbly washed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Simon had not given Jesus a kiss of greeting when he entered the house, but she had lovingly kissed his feet. Simon had not put oil on Jesus' head to refresh him, but she had poured perfume on his feet in gratitude for Jesus' grace. She had done all of this by faith, even before Jesus forgave her, believing that she would find mercy, relief, and comfort from him. And so, because of her grateful love for him and her faith in him as the one who could forgive, he forgave her. Setting her free from guilt, he gave her a new beginning. What was Simon thinking? Perhaps he thought that of course she did all these things for Jesus because she was so grateful. He reasoned she ought to be grateful because, as everyone knows, she had lived a very wicked life. He was not necessarily trying to be tough on her as much as he was trying to justify the fact that he had failed to show Jesus the courtesies he should have shown him. Simon was interested in what Jesus taught. He was curious and open to what Jesus might say to him, unlike some of the other Pharisees who were openly hostile towards the teacher. On the other hand, Simon was far from ready to open his heart with humility, admit his distance from God, and seek forgiveness. Simon perceived himself to be different from people like this woman. Was he like the man who owed 50 denarii in comparison to someone who owed 500? Simon, in fact, was just as far from the Father because of his pride and judgmental attitude. Love for neighbor was not in his heart. Comparing Simon to someone who owed just 50 denarii was Jesus' way of gently, compassionately dealing with Simon. If he had suddenly told Simon he was as guilty as the woman, Simon would have defensively terminated the conversation and refused to think more about guilt and forgiveness. Simon needed to think and discover the truth by humbling his heart. Simon was hurting on some level too, but he dealt with his failings in a different way, by convincing himself that even though he made mistakes, he was better than a lot of people. The reason he could not understand why the woman was crying was because he had never allowed himself to feel the despair of his own sin. His criticism and pride had no doubt damaged his relationships. He would have to realize that his judgmental attitude was his ineffective way to deal with his own mistakes and failings and guilt. The group of dinner guests, listening to the conversation between Simon, Jesus, and the woman, was even less willing to examine their own hearts. They became stuck on the question of how Jesus could forgive sin. They had not come to believe what the woman believed, or even what Simon believed about Jesus. The crowd was like the older son in the parable of the lost son. The older brother could not understand why his father had forgiven his younger brother and accepted him so completely as a son again. And Jesus came to confront people with a reality that they could hardly comprehend. Just as the father in the parable had run to forgive his son, Jesus had come to compassionately and freely express the love of the Father in real life to real people who struggled mightily with the destructive tragedy of sin. Jesus was God running. Simon would have been much more merciful to the woman if he had been aware of how deeply he also needed mercy. Imagine if Simon had been a devoted follower of Jesus who had understood his own desperate need for forgiveness and freedom. Picture how the scene would have been different. Simon would have gladly invited the woman to his home. He would immediately have been touched with compassion for her injured spirit, just as the Samaritan was filled with compassion upon seeing the victim of the robbery laying by the roadside. He would have moved quickly to welcome her while his other guests mentally walked to the other side of the road. He would have given her his seat next to Jesus, filled her plate with food, and joyfully invited her to spend as much time as she needed to speak with a teacher. He would have loved his neighbor as himself. Now think about the qualities of love that are shown in this passage. Because love is manifested by its qualities, such as compassion. Compassion is to feel the suffering of another person deeply enough to want to relieve their suffering. How did Jesus practice compassion in this moment? He understood that the woman was suffering from guilt, hopelessness, shame, and the isolation of sin. And he offered her the relief of forgiveness and a new beginning. There is mercy. Mercy is another quality of love. It's to relieve another person's suffering without thinking about whether they deserve relief. And Jesus practiced mercy. Without thinking about what the woman might have deserved, she gave her the relief of forgiveness. Simon should have decided to become a neighbor to the woman by making her feel comfortable and directing her to Jesus. There's also forgiveness. Forgiveness is another quality of love. It's to disregard an offense and treat the offensive person as if the offense never occurred. How did Jesus practice forgiveness? He completely forgave her and treated her as if she had not lived a life of sin, giving her a new beginning. He told her, "Go in peace." She was free. There's also gentleness. Gentleness is to treat others with tenderness instead of severity, not wanting to cause harm. How did Jesus practice gentleness? His praise for the woman's heart and actions elevated her in the eyes of everyone, showing acceptance that others were unwilling to give. Jesus even treated Simon with gentleness, helping him to understand without condemning him. There's also patience. Patience is another quality of love. It's to hold back negative emotions, tolerate, wait, and not give up. How did Jesus practice compassion, rather patience? He was patient with the woman, allowing her to express her sadness in her own way. He also endured the offensive reactions of Simon and the others without becoming angry. There's also humility. Humility is another quality of love. It's to lower ourselves, for example, by admitting our mistakes, serving the needs of others first, and recognizing, like a child, that we are small, weak, and dependent on others, and we need to learn. Lots to learn. The woman was the one who practiced humility. She was willing to admit her life of mistakes, bravely approaching Jesus to find forgiveness. And Simon, on the other hand, attempted to cover his sin by criticizing others, believing he was superior to them. There is unconditional love, too. It's to care for the welfare of another person without expecting anything in return or thinking about whether the person deserves our care. How did Jesus practice unconditional love? He cared for the spiritual welfare of both the woman and Simon without asking whether they were worthy of being loved. There is goodness. Goodness is to live a beneficial life that brings benefit to others. And Jesus practiced goodness because he brought the benefit of spiritual and emotional healing to the woman's life and gently helped Simon benefit from self-reflection. And there is thankfulness or gratitude. It's to appreciate and value the gifts we receive. How did the woman practice thankfulness? She understood her profound need for a new beginning and a new life. She brought the perfume to anoint Jesus' feet because she was thankful even before she arrived at Simon's house. Now it's our turn to go and do the same. Think of someone you are quick to judge when he or she does something you don't agree with. How will you be more patient and compassionate with this person? And who do you know who is suffering emotionally or spiritually? And what can you do for them to love them as your neighbor, showing mercy and gentleness? This is the way of Jesus, the way of compassion, mercy, the grace, the way of love. Now it's our turn to go and do likewise. May God bless you.